pod bay doors, please, Hal.
The pod bay doors are slightly open once again. I'm your host, Jerry Dean Roberts, for ArmchairCinema.com. Sitting here with my number one, my co-host, the critic for TalkMovieMe.com, the one and only Mr. Doug Heller. How the heck are you today, sir?
Make it show. I'm the one with the hairstyle for Picard. So.
In that he has none.
Although mine was a voluntary effort and not entirely a natural event.
Mine is getting there. Last February, I got a buzz cut for the very first time, and I fell in love with it.
Yeah.
So
I went from a full head of hair to actively considering shaving my head to asking my wife if she thought that would be a terrible thing, and she said, no, that might be all right. And then she went to work at night, and I just took the clippers and razor and just shaved the whole thing.
Well, see, from my perspective, the gravitational pull tilted, and it went from the top of your head down to your chin. So.
That's true. I did grow out my beard then.
But we are talking today, speaking of gravitational pull, we're talking today in our mini episode about Season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation, which I finished.
Which is the best season until you get to Season 6.
It is, and I'm a good ways through Season 6, but we're doing this season by season, so I wanted to talk about Season 5, which... and if you talk about Season 5, the first thing that comes up is unification.
Mm-hmm.
This is the Spock episode. This is the Spock twofer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was... And I didn't realize this at the time. This is, in a small way, a primer for Star Trek 6. Because Spock mentions briefly the aftermath of the plot of Star Trek 6.
When does he do that in?
He does that very briefly just after they find him.
Oh, this is post-6.
This is pre-6.
This episode is pre-6? Well,
it was released
pre-6. So, yeah.
This episode came out in November of 1991.
Mm-hmm.
And Star Trek 6 came out a month later.
Okay.
And he mentions the unification with the Klingons. Because in this episode, he's trying to have a unification with is it the Romulans?
Right. Well, they're not trying to reunify with the Klingons in 6. They are trying to get a peace treaty together.
Right.
This is literally the Romulans and the Vulcans are the same species.
Mm-hmm.
That just...
They're cousins.
Well, yeah. The Romulans left Vulcan and colonized Romulus. And
right.
became a whole separate people. But they're basically... the same species.
Mm.
So Spock's wish, along with some of the senators and the people that he had made contact with, wanted to reunify the Vulcan and the Romulan peoples, basically eliminating the need for an aggressive Romulan empire, and basically kind of making the Vulcans and the Romulans all the same thing, and probably folding it into a larger Federation alliance or something similar to that.
But there are factions on both sides that don't want that.
Exactly. But
which is why he has to go undercover.
Right. But with Star Trek 6, this was all because all of those events were spurred a couple of months prior due to the explosion on the dilithium mining moon of Praxis.
Yeah, and Spock sort of alludes to the fact that what's happening in this episode, is a long-term result of what happened there.
I don't see that personally. I'm happy you do, but I don't. I think they're two different things because that briefing in Star Trek 6 is like 2 months after the explosion.
Yeah.
So.
But don't forget, this is also 75 years later.
The unification.
Right.
Yeah. Are you saying he mentions? Well, he can't mention reunification in Star Trek 6 because it's 75 years before.
He mentions.
He mentions Star Trek 6 in unification. See, that's where I think I'm
I'm talking about in
confused.
Unification.
Okay, I thought you were saying
He
in Star Trek
mentions
6 he
no, no, no.
mentions unification. I'm like, well, that would be not possible.
He makes mention of what happened at Kittimer
Right,
and
right,
the
right.
assassinations and all of that.
Yes,
This
yes,
this episode came prior to Star Trek 6.
yes.
Very prior. Like a month earlier.
But obviously the events happened significantly
Right.
after.
Right. Um but
Because I think
I
they mentioned the
remember
Kittimer Accords throughout seasons, throughout
oh, it's
all of
all over
the
this show.
yeah, yeah. Even
Yeah.
long before Star Trek 6, they've been mentioning the Kittimer Accords every time they deal with the Klingons.
Yeah. But I mean it is it's all over this show.
Mm-hmm.
Because Worf mentions it how many times.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, when I saw this when it aired in late 1991, I didn't like it.
Mm.
I didn't like this two-parter. Um, it just didn't seem like a good use of this character. But having seen it now,
You realize
um,
that it is the epitome of this character.
it is very much so.
It is. It is
Particularly after you've
everything.
seen, particularly after you've seen the Abrams or the
Yeah, yeah,
prequel, whatever you
yeah.
call it, trilogy, the
The
alternate timelines. Now
The
that you've seen
Kelvin
that,
timeline. Yeah.
now that you've got the whole arc of the character, it's a little more. It makes it a little more. It sticks a little better.
See, for
And
me, I
also,
always Spock was always the consummate diplomat,
yeah,
and I don't think I saw this episode probably until after I saw Star Trek 6,
hmm
which would have that uh, diplomat kind of ingrained
right.
in me because I'd probably had Star Trek 6 memorized really quickly after it came out on VHS.
Mm.
we, we got it. We had that one. I don't remember why we had it. We might have actually gotten it from McDonald's back when they still did stuff like that,
Mm.
where you could get like a discounted copy of the video cassette. I think that's where we got Dances with Wolves too, which
I'm just
is
gonna say that Star
odd.
Trek. We're talking about Star Trek 6. Star Trek 6 has one of my favorite quotes from Jim Kirk. If anybody can think of another way to screw up this evening, I'll be in my quarters. So it was like every time
Chekhov,
anything
you know
happens,
anything about a neutron surge? Only the size of my head. Note to the galley: Romulan ale no longer to be served at diplomatic functions.
you realize also Klingons are terrible dinner guests. Even as civil
Well,
as they try to
well,
be, because they
well,
haven't figured it. This is a civilization that has not figured out napkins.
well.
Okay.
See, this is the Klingons of the Next Generation, and therefore Star Trek 6, and
hmm
really kind of 4, 5, and 6, are really more. They kind of turned them the warrior race into something like Huns
Yeah.
under Attila. You know,
Yeah.
so just very honorable, very looking for the fight, but also not stupid about rushing in where they're not going to be
Right.
victorious and stuff like that. So yeah, they kind of made them a little. Well, they don't have any manners
Yeah.
in terms in the way that the Federation does or that
They're more
humans do.
prehistoric. They're
They're
more
they're
fourth
more
century.
visceral.
Mm.
They're more visceral people, whereas the Romulans are conniving and duplicitous. And I always kind of thought that the Romulans were kind of like the World War II Germans,
Yeah.
because on the face they might be willing to hold a peace, but behind the scenes they're really trying to work to bring everything down in favor of themselves.
Self-serving.
Yeah, until there's all-out war, and then they do some major damage. Like,
Go through this show. Some hardcore Star Trek fan, please go through this show and tell me um, I'll post an email link. I'll post our email link to this. I want some Star Trek fan to go through this show and tell me how many times a Klingon says the word honor. It's in every freaking show.
I'm gonna wager that somebody probably already has. And if you give me a couple of minutes, I'd probably be able to find it.
Every time they're together, honor, honor, honor.
Yeah, yeah. I am, okay, yeah, there we go.
But there's something else I got to mention too. I wanted to make sure I got this in here. The second episode of this season is called Darmok.
Oh, that's one of the best episodes.
That is one of the best episodes. It has so much to say about how we communicate
Yeah.
and how we learn to communicate. But that's not what I picked up from this episode. This is the first time we get to see Picard in that really sharp-looking jacket.
I love that velour jacket.
I love that velour jacket.
Ooh, they actually sell that. I found it, and it's like $75, and I can. I want that as like a lounge.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
He wears it several times after this.
Yeah.
Even the episode I'm watching right now, he wears that jacket.
From season 5 on, that's almost his uniform.
Yeah.
Basically.
Because that uniform was so uncomfortable, because you notice when he stands up, he tugs on it. That became a thing, but it was really just him just being uncomfortable in that costume. But what was the other thing I wanted to talk about? Yeah, and also in this one they introduced Ensign Ro, who's one of my favorite characters. I love Michelle Forbes. And I just love this character because she's difficult but not too difficult, surly but not too surly. And in season 6, when she gets to be a kid, it's even better.
I love it when they revert back. I love that they use the kid that they cast as Picard's nephew as Picard. Love it. Perfect. Astounding. I wanted to see that kid in so much more.
He's so good. He's so good.
I love it. I absolutely adore it.
This one also, you should also mention the episode called Cause and Effect.
Ooh.
This is the one where in the prologue, the Enterprise blows up. I mean, it starts with everybody running and yelling and red lights and everything's going off, and the warp core is about to erupt, and Geordi wants to eject the warp core, but the warp core is offline. With the eject's offline, it's everything that could go wrong goes wrong, and right before the opening credits, the whole thing blows up. And I remember watching this because I was standing in a room with a group of guys at the time, and we were about to go somewhere. And we set the episode to record, and we watched the prologue, and it was like there were 6 of us, and we're standing there watching this, and it was like it blew up, and like none of us could breathe for a second. It was because you're like, how are they going to get out of this one? Yeah. It turns out to be a really clever episode because they keep going back.
Loop episode, yeah.
Yeah, they keep going back, and they keep going back and back and back, and it's the Groundhog Day. They keep picking up different things, and it's just so clever. And you don't really even find out what's going on until the very end.
Right.
It's just good writing.
It is. It's high quality. You know what? Oddly enough, a Google search and a look through the Star Trek Wikipedia, the Memory Alpha Star Trek Wiki, does not have that listed. So yes, I would also love to see how many times. Also,
Klingons.
If you're having fun with it, or if you need a little break, go through and see how many times they say Patak.
Yeah, Patak.
Which means asshole, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Did not know that.
asshole son of a bitch somewhere in there. It's yeah, yeah. I had a cassette of Klingon, but I only really learned the curse words
Mm.
because they're right at the beginning. Uh, yeah.
Let me tell you something. I've always known, moving on to another episode, I've always known that people were irritated by Wesley Crusher.
Hmm.
I assumed it was only in like the first two seasons. I'm in season five and I'm still irritated by Wesley.
Are you talking about the game?
I'm talking about the game.
Let me tell you something, and this is not going to make you happy, but that is one
Mm.
of my favorite episodes.
I know it is, and it's probably because of Ashley Judd,
Mostly, yeah.
but it feels like fan fiction. I don't know why. It.
I loved it because it was a kid. Because I saw this when I was probably 13 or 14.
Mhm.
It was a kid that was using all of these methods and successfully getting around technology that has stymied much older, more experienced people.
Right.
And he does everything from setting up a site-to-site transport rig. He sets up a phaser just to try to look like it was cutting through a force field, but it was set on automatic so he could misdirect them. He cloaked his heat signature so they couldn't find him in the air ducts. That's some really, really clever stuff there. Yes, he's annoying. Will Wheaton, as a young man, had an annoying voice. Um, I love
I
him.
just love the fact that whenever he got in trouble at Starfleet Academy, he kind of got cut down to size a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit.
Have you gotten to the episode? I don't remember which season it's in. It's either 5 or 6, where there's a there's an accident at Starfleet Academy, and a kid dies during a
That's what I'm
training
talking about.
formation. That's yeah. Um,
That's the one with Tom Paris,
yes, yes, it is. Yes, it
the
is.
actor who plays Tom Paris.
Yes, yes. Uh,
That's one. Yeah, because that one ends with Picard just cutting him down to size.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
like,
yeah. That one, I really like that one because it's a detective story, but
mm,
it's also it gives you like a little after school special about bullying and peer pressure and stuff like that. Like, just say
mm,
what we're all saying and everything will be fine. It's like, but
mm.
this kid died and you were wrong to make it happen. Like,
What kind of commander do you think you're going to be?
yeah, right. I made a mistake. Let's all cover this up, and everyone will be culpable, so that I can say, well, it wasn't just me that covered it up.
It
I'll
was it
take
was
you
all
all
of
down.
us.
I'll take you all down with me.
He should be a politician.
Yes. Although I don't know how well he would do in Federation politics. It's
Mm.
probably slightly more honorable than what we have now.
Okay, let's talk about a matter of time because this episode breaks my heart.
Mm-hmm.
This is the episode with Matt Frewer.
Mm-hmm.
This is the one where he apparently is a guy from as a historian or archaeologist from the future,
Mm-hmm.
and he's come back in time to settle to witness something that's going to happen, a catastrophic event that's going to kill thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And this doctor, I can't remember, it's Dr. Rasmussen, I can't remember his name,
I think it was Rasmussen, yeah.
but he's played by Matt Frewer,
Mm-hmm.
who is best known as Max Headroom.
Max Headroom.
And I would have been happy if he'd have played it as Max Headroom.
Me too.
He was their third choice because originally this character was supposed to be played by Robin Williams.
I really wish you hadn't told me that.
And Robin Williams was too busy because Hook was running behind schedule.
Hmm.
And also, the other actor they were going to get was Tom Baker,
Oh,
who was one of the doctors.
the fourth Doctor, and the most popular and possibly the best. Doctor.
and the one that I know, and I'm not a Doctor Who fan. But
I'll let you slide on that one, but that's probably the next series you should get into.
when I watch the episode, I love Matt Frew. He does a fine job.
It's really good, and if you don't know that they were going to cast two high grade uh, award winning actors,
Mhm.
you wouldn't think that there's anything wrong with the episode until
Right.
you find out that it could have been Robin
Mhm.
Williams, Oscar winner, future
Mhm.
Oscar winner, Robin Williams, or the inimitable
Tom Baker.
Tom Baker with a voice like velvet and
Mhm.
a presence, a screen presence that you cannot get anywhere else.
It's a comic role, and he does a good job.
Yes.
He does a fine job. It's
Because
just
Matt Frew
you
was a
realize
comedian. He was funny. He is
it's
funny.
just you realize what it could have been.
Hmm.
I think the writing is a little off because the whole conceit of it is he knows that something's going to happen, but he won't tell anybody.
Hmm.
And there's this whole moral dilemma over knowing the future, changing the past, saving lives, and all of this, that he knows what's going to happen.
Right. But it ends up he was just a huckster.
Right, because at the end of the episode, he
Stolen
gets
tech and stuff.
in his shuttle with Data, and he tells him his entire plan
Yeah.
for exposition purposes.
Yeah.
He just blows up and tells him everything, and I was like, that's bad writing.
Yeah.
I know it. I know they only have 45 minutes, but it's like it felt like, okay, we're running short on time. Here's everything you need to know.
Possibly. Possibly.
Yeah, yeah. It was just kind of like, okay.
Still a
But
good episode.
it's still a good episode. It's hard to watch. The other problem, um, well, the other problem, I'm starting to get really frustrated by any episode, almost any episode that involves Alexander,
Oh, yeah.
who is Worf's son.
They did not, uh, they didn't know what to do with him
Right.
at all.
And
That doesn't get better in DS9 either.
the scenes between him and Worf are very stiff and very after school special kind
But
of.
they always are because Worf has no idea what he's doing.
Right.
That's like kind of the whole point. Like Alexander was originally exclusively raised by his half-human mother,
Kalar.
Kalar, who did not believe in Klingon tradition. She didn't like the whole
I love
honoring
Kalar.
warrior. She was awesome. But when she was murdered because she was a an intermediary in a Klingon dispute who got murdered when they didn't like her decision,
Mhm.
and so that gave Worf custody of Alexander.
Mhm.
Worf didn't know what to do with him, which translated into the writers not knowing quite what to do with him.
Right.
And the kid playing him did everything he could, and he was a decent actor when he was little,
Mhm.
but
Brian Bonsall is his name.
because of what they gave him to work with, his performances don't come off well.
He comes off as somebody that reacts,
Mhm.
not somebody that he doesn't really act. He just kind of reacts.
Mhm.
He's much better in there's a season 6 episode where he and Worf get. This could have been a whole series of things.
Oh yeah,
He and Worf get involved in.
as he gets older, they get a little better with what to do with him. Um, in the one or two episodes that he shows up in DS9, they kind of have reconciled his character
Mhm.
to a point, but he's also what is he here? 6,
Something like that.
like 6 years old, and then just 4 short years later, he's like 20.
Yeah.
And on DS9, he's full grown. He's serving on
Well,
a
he's Klingon. You
battleship.
don't know.
I don't know what their growth spurts do, but I'm pretty sure that he was not old enough to be as old as he was on DS9.
Right. Well, there is. They could have made a whole series out of these. There was an episode in season 6 that we'll talk about next time, but where he and Worf go into this holodeck program where they're in a western,
I love that
and
one.
it's a great episode. And he's much better there. They could have done a whole series where they're playing in different scenarios and things like that. While they're in the holodeck,
Mm-hmm.
that would have been a lot of fun. But it's just he's just kind of a weak character. But speaking of weakness, God, I also have to talk about Cost of Living, which is the stupidest episode and the creepiest episode of this entire season, and probably the back half of the series. This is the one where Loxana Troy is gonna get married to a man she doesn't know,
Yeah.
and she bonds with Alexander, and it's really creepy.
Yeah.
They end up sharing a nude mud bath together, and it's like, ugh.
Now, again, as I stated before, within the realities of the show, and exclusively within the realities of the show, Beta Z culture is largely nude.
Mhm.
So
That's why she gets. Well, but the other thing is when she gets married at the end of it, and she shows up butt naked, and he's smiling at her. It feels a little creepy.
yeah,
Um, and then the episode ends with him and her and Worf and Troy in a nude mud bath together. It's all I This is the one where she invents this weird playland
yeah, which
on the holodeck, this
is
Fruity Land kind of place.
seriously like an acid-induced bad trip. Like this is the brown acid, I think, for
Right.
Woodstock. This shit's weird. Like
It
I
looks like some bizarre like British kids show from the 70s or something. It's just it's just well, another one I want to mention, we saw this the other night, is an episode called The Perfect Mate.
mm-hmm.
This is the one where they're visited by an alien who wants to, whose species has to find the perfect mate, so she's very seductive. And it's played by a 27-year-old actress named Famke Janssen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to put this as delicately as I can. Even my wife was like, damn. Yeah.
Yeah.
And when she's hitting on Riker, I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, my wife made an interesting observation that she thought that this alien is probably the same species as Dax
Maybe.
because the markings look the same.
Right. She could be a Trill.
Yeah, I don't think they ever mention it.
Although the Trill are first introduced in the Next Generation,
Mhm.
and they don't have those spots.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that. It was earlier on, and Riker took possession of the worm, the
Yeah.
whatever the symbiote, and held it because the guy that was the Trill that was holding it was dying, and they needed the knowledge of the symbiote to do these negotiations. So Riker took it into himself. They found out he was compatible. He did the negotiations, and then they took the symbiote out and put it into another Trill. they looked completely different. They had like a mottled forehead, like it was just like sticking out, kind of Cro-Magnon-y, kind of, but not as far out, and they were completely different. And then they redesigned them for Jadzia in
Yeah,
DS9 because, well, she was super hot, and they didn't want to cover her up with a weird forehead. So they
yeah.
just gave her hot stripes or hot spots and all the way down her side. I was in love with Terry Farrell. Shut up.
Who wasn't? I'm really. I hate that I'm only doing this season by season for this reason, but um, the one late in this season, they also was the episode I Borg,
Mm-hmm.
which is the one that introduced Hugh,
Yeah.
which causes massive problems later on.
Yeah.
This is the one where they capture the dying Borg, but they're trying to figure out what to do with him. And it's interesting. It's an interesting turnabout because if they've not spoken to him, they want to dispose of him. But when they spend a little time with him, they figure out that he's not quite the killing machine that they thought he was.
Right.
And I'm down for any episode that deals with the Borg. I
Oh
love the
yeah.
Borg.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
wait to get to Descent.
Oof.
Um,
Is that the one that
that is the season
lore
six
lore
season
gets
finale.
yeah lore gives Data an emotion chip and
Mm,
that only gives him negative emotions. So he's joins up with Lore and confused and really taken apart by these negative emotions. That yeah, that's a good one.
yeah.
And the all the Borg that Hugh had dissociated from the collective are wandering and leaderless and don't know what to do, so they turn
Mm.
to Lore. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a good one.
The last one before we go that I want to talk about is Time Zero.
Mm-hmm. You don't like this one.
I didn't like this one.
Okay, all right.
And
I love this episode, and
I
I
really,
adore the
I
guy
guess
who
we can,
plays Samuel
I guess we can talk about both parts. Yeah, do you know who that is?
Clemens.
That is Jerry Hardin. He played Mulder's father on X Files.
Yes, 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 yes.
I had to look that up.
Absolutely.
He is really, really good in this one. And I'm not a big fan of time travel episodes, but this one was really, really good.
Right, because they didn't do
It's
it
a
like it was
mystery.
an accident. Yeah, it's a mystery, and it's a new species that they hadn't encountered before, who are like sucking out what the electromagnetic energy out of people,
Mm.
and they're like these alternate dimensional beings that yeah,
It looked really creepy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're basically they're specters.
Mm.
They come into this dimension looking like they're what we would call ghosts,
Mm.
which was a really cool way to explain ghosts in the Star Trek universe. I liked
Yeah.
that. But yeah.
And by the way, I'm always suspicious, and I think I have this episode to thank for this. I'm always suspicious of when a supporting character from the past, in the past, in any time travel story, when you meet a supporting player and they don't tell you their name, I'm
Mm-hmm.
always suspicious that this is going to be somebody who's famous
Mm-hmm.
because Data's bellhop at the hotel is named Jack, and he wants to go to Alaska.
Yeah. Jack
It's
London.
Jack London.
Yes. Yes, it is. That is the part that I hate the most.
Why?
um, it's more personal. I have
Yeah.
never been a fan of Jack London's writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, no, don't tell him to go up to Alaska. Tell him to stay there in San Francisco. I don't want Call of the Wild. I don't want it.
I don't like it.
I don't like it.
I thought it was clever,
It is, but
and it's in the middle of It's in the middle of Mark Twain trying to yeah him,
Yep.
trying to get him out of the room. But Jerry Harden is having so much
So much
fun with
fun.
that performance.
He is. I look. The only the only other person that I would want to see in a white seersucker suit as Mark Twain would have been Hal Holbrook.
Yeah.
That's it.
Um, the one thing I would have done that I think would have been a lot of fun is if they'd have kept him. If because at the end of the two-parter, he ends up on the Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it would have been a lot of fun if you did one more episode where he's on the Enterprise and just trying to, fun little lark
Make
episode
it
where
like
you
a
got
fun
Mark.
three-parter and just
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, sort of a
That would have been
2.5.
fun. Yeah, that would have been fun. You know what would be even more? I just thought of this.
What's that?
Wouldn't it be cool that if sometime during Picard
Mhm.
they went back?
Yeah.
That'd be cool if they had
What
to
is?
for some reason.
But I've got to ask you, what is this show's tie to San Francisco? It's always because Starfleet's in San Francisco?
Yeah.
But it's always when they go back in time, it's almost always San Francisco.
Right, because they usually end up because that's a place where every character in Starfleet will know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Because I mean,
With the
they did that in
exception
Star Trek 4.
with the exception of course with Star Trek 4 because you would assume one could assume that Chekhov and Uhura spent at least 4 years in San Francisco at the academy, and they didn't know how to get to Alameda across
They
the
didn't
bay.
know how to get to Alameda.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a great line, it's a great bit, but they went to school there for 4 years,
Mhm.
and they had teleport. Like they know where things are in relation to everything else, especially on the planet Earth. Like,
Well, and I think it would have been smarter for them to think, okay, this isn't here yet. Okay, Alameda is here, but
maybe
we're
400 years in the
here.
future, it's in a
Right.
different location because of continental drift and all.
Right.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
Other than just them standing on a street corner asking random people and having a cop give them the stink eye.
Yeah. You know where the nuclear vessels are.
Well, preview season 6 is. I think this is probably the most creative.
It has
That's gonna.
it has some episodes that it has more episodes in it that I would describe as perfect than any
Mhm.
other Next Generation season.
I can't say that about season 5.
No.
It has a few episodes that I've rethought. Unification being one of them.
Which I'm happy about because season 5 has a lot of good stuff going on.
When I saw Darmok the first time, I was kind of irritated by it.
Really? I've
Just
always
well,
thought that that's one of the best ones.
I was in my 20s and I was just kind of a, you know.
It's a
but I
it's a slow-paced episode about listening, being patient, and understanding. So I guess in your 20s you don't want to hear
probably
any of
one,
that.
yeah. But
slow down and try to work it out instead of just getting frustrated, angry, and punching. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
That's what that whole
Rather than
episode
being
is.
Klingon about it.
Yep.
So I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm ready to get through this. I want to get to DS9, but I did it. I have enjoyed. I loved season 4. I loved season 5 even more, and I'm loving season 6 even more than that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ready to get through this and get to season 7.
It's a shame once you get to season 7 because there's some really good stuff and there is some season 1 level atrocities.
I don't remember much about season 7. I remember the final episode.
Do you know why you don't remember a lot of season 7? Most of it was terrible and not worth remembering. I'm going to say one word, and I'm going to leave you at that for season 7. Masks.
Masks. Okay. Okay.
Prepare to be disappointed, like, thoroughly. I hate that episode. episode.
Well, when I watched Cost of Living, I kept thinking, this is like season one.
Yeah.
The Fruity Land episode with Waxana, I was like, this is.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was a season one styled episode in season five, and it feels out of place. It's very out of place.
I always, and by the way, I'm starting to look at the directors a little bit because I'm noticing Jonathan Frakes is directing a lot of stuff.
Jonathan Frakes and
Patrick Stewart directed the episode where they turned into little kids.
yeah, he directed one episode and he said, "I'm good."
Yeah.
They asked him to direct one of the movies. He goes, "No, I don't want to. I did it enough on the show. I'm good."
Well,
But
and also,
Frakes and LeVar Burton took over a lot of the directing duties on the show.
yeah.
Brent
Um,
Spiner did a few episodes too.
I'm noticing that the bigger episodes, the
Mm-hmm.
director is Les Landau.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to do the bigger ones, the more epic ones. Like there's one in season 6 called Chain of Command.
Yes.
It's a two-parter.
Yeah.
That's the one. I see four lights.
That is a perfect episode.
It is. I
That is
just
a
finished it.
perfect episode. You finished
Um,
that while I was watching the movie that we're going to talk about for the next
Yeah.
episode.
But yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'm ready. I'm ready to get through it. I'm ready to get to DS9.
I'm ready for you
But
to get to DS9 too, but not until the beginning of next year because screener season's about to start, and I don't want to
Yeah.
binge a TV show.
that's one of the reasons we're about to start getting screeners because we belong to the Online Film Critics Society, and I'm trying to get through. I'm trying to get through Next Generation before that starts happening.
Yeah, yeah. I have purposefully been avoiding television shows when they come out with new episodes. I've been watching things like things on Netflix that I like a lot of their animated stuff, honestly.
Mhm.
So if something comes out and it says new episodes and I've been really looking forward to it, I look at when it is, what I'm in the middle of watching, and if I can spare however long it takes to get through it, and if it doesn't, I've taken to not watching it at all.
I want to tell you something.
Or I'll just watch it all.
I want to tell you something. 10 years ago, I had a swath of television shows that I would watch on broadcast television. Probably 15, 20 shows that I never missed. Now I have maybe 2.
See, we were like that 10 years ago or more. We would only have like 2 or 3 things that we would watch actively. And then we got turned on to so many good things. There's Discovery, there's the new Twilight Zone, there's we've gotten into The Flash and some of the DC shows.
Yeah.
But The Flash definitely every week. Uh, you know, anytime new episodes of streaming things, we got into The Runaways and on Hulu and a few other things on there, Castle Rock, and there's some really great stuff out there. The best part is that you don't have to try to set a recording or do something. You can
Right.
always catch
It's
up
always
to
there.
the episode later on. If you decide, I'm too far behind in this show, but I really like binging it, so I'll just wait until the end of the season and then just treat myself all the way through. I would recommend that with Brooklyn Nine-Nine and The Good Place. I would not recommend that with This Is Us. My wife and I got really far behind on that in, I think, season 2 or 3, and we watched like 6 or 7 episodes in a day, and I was emotionally destroyed. Like,
Yeah.
That's an intense show.
I
I
really,
can't do this ever again.
for the first couple of seasons, I was really hardcore about Orange is the New Black.
I still haven't watched any of that.
And I watched 2 seasons of it hardcore. I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
straight. And then somewhere in the middle of season 3, I don't know, something happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't go back to it.
Well, that's
But
kind of...
I know it's always there.
Yeah, exactly. Daredevil was like that for us. We watched the first season of Daredevil and we loved it.
Oh, those break my heart. Those Netflix shows from Marvel break my heart
We
because
watched the second season
mm,
of Daredevil, and I was taken out of it. I don't like the Punisher in the first place, really.
it's kind of a one-note show.
It became a one note show.
Mm.
I love Stick, and then we got like one or two episodes into the third season, which took place after the Defenders and all of that.
Yeah,
I think we got two episodes in, and we had to leave it to go do something, and we never came back to it.
I finished all of Daredevil.
Uh-huh.
I finished Jessica Jones, which I was really disappointed in the second season.
A lot of people said that they were disappointed in the second season. I didn't mind the second season; it wasn't as good as the first. I have not yet watched the third season of that.
Well, did you watch the first season?
Of Jessica Jones?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
the first season was so great in pulling together a good villain, and
what
Kilgore. It was
what they had.
Kilgore.
Yeah, no, it was yeah, it was yeah, Kilgore,
Kil, yeah,
and it was David Tennant,
Kilgrave.
Kilgrave, the 10th Doctor. Kilgore is the Colonel in Apocalypse Now.
But he had a very weak exit.
There's reasons for that.
I know, but it's just when I watched it, I was like,
Yeah.
it's just
Um,
it built up, it built up and built up and built up, and then just kind of deflated.
right. And I kind of admire it for that because it didn't go for the big all-out special effects knockdown drag out fight.
Yeah,
That it kind of kept it on the personal level, which is exactly what it was, a personal show. Uh, in that season, the second season, yes, I see where it went wrong. I didn't dislike it, but I didn't love it like I did the first season. I still have to see the third season. I was surprised and elated that they made a third season because everything else got canceled after two or three.
I'm just gonna say, if I could salvage any of those shows for Disney Plus, it'd be Luke
Luke
Cage.
Cage,
Luke Cage is
undoubtedly, that was remarkable. Both seasons of that were spectacular.
Luke Cage was phenomenal.
Yes,
I love that show.
I loved every second of that show.
Um,
So good.
I really liked Daredevil and I really liked Luke Cage, but Luke Cage,
I wanted more from Daredevil. Daredevil fell apart in the second
yeah,
season because it was
had a really solid first season.
Oh yeah, great first season. Um,
Iron
all of
Fist,
them, with the exception of Iron Fist, had a great first season.
Iron Fist was just terrible.
It was
It's just
I mean, I didn't hate it as much as everybody else, but I certainly didn't like it.
it never got off the ground. It
No,
was like
it never figured out what it wanted to be, which was
right,
really upsetting by the time you get to episode 13 and they're still trying to figure out what the character wants to be. It's like,
right.
guys, we are through a full season. He should have at least found some semblance of himself by now.
And by season 13, I'm sitting there going, I still, after 13 of these episodes, I still don't care about this character.
Exactly, exactly. That's I still haven't seen season 2 of that.
Yeah,
I feel like
I'm
I
not.
probably will at some point. Uh, and they will probably be available whether they kickstart them again or not on
Mhm.
Disney Plus. They will probably be available there.
I hope they kick these back in onto Disney Plus because I really I don't want them to abandon this.
I've heard uh, through even the different actors and the different producers say don't count out the Defenders series
Mhm.
uh, surrounding individual series in the Defenders. Don't count them out
Yeah,
because I figured Netflix was canceling them because Disney Plus was coming and they were going to pull them from the
I
contract.
assume they were forced to.
I figured Netflix was forced to cancel them by Disney because Disney was going to take them off of the platform and just keep them for themselves. I
Yeah,
assumed that. Uh, that may still happen. We're also going to be getting Kevin Feige produced X Men,
yeah,
and I wouldn't be surprised if the Runaways and the couple of X Men stuff that's on Hulu right now and Fox would be transferred over to Disney Plus too.
I will just say this to bring it back around to Star Trek. Please, 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 Netflix, don't get rid of Star Trek. I don't like getting a TV show through the mail. I hate that
Well,
because
on the
on a
plus
disc you
side,
only get 5 episodes.
right. On the plus side, if Netflix does end up losing their contract with them, Hulu and Amazon both have all of the series on them available for free. So
Right.
they're pretty much universal because they are owned by CBS,
Yeah.
but they were produced for syndication, not
Right.
for CBS. So the rights are a lot different and tend to fall more towards Paramount and Desilu and the Gene Roddenberry's production company that was
NBC.
yeah that was producing them and had the money for them, but CBS owns the distribution
Yeah.
in a lot of cases.
Well.
But I remember watching Next Generation or DS9 when it was new in
Mhm.
syndication on Fox, but it was a CBS production. You know.
I'm really very, very glad that Star Trek went into started in first run syndication
Mm-hmm.
because one of the four networks would have dumped this.
This would have been gone in halfway through season one. We would have
Yeah,
had
it would not have added season two.
we would have had a Firefly issue
Yeah.
with Star Trek: The Next Generation, and
Well, not
regrettably that
necessarily.
I think
I
it would have.
disagree. I don't think it would have been a Firefly issue because somebody would have revived it.
Hmm.
Star Trek had too much of a legacy not to. They may not have put it together in this format, but I think because the original creator, because Gene Roddenberry was part of it, may have had a lot to do with how it managed to get over those first two
Right,
bumpy
because
years.
he was an active executive producer until he died
Yeah.
in what 92.
Yeah, Unification, by the way, is dedicated to him.
Right.
Both parts open with a
Mm-hmm.
tagline.
And then Star Trek Six was also dedicated to him. That was the first movie to be
Right.
released after Roddenberry's death.
Um, but it's interesting coming out of those two seasons, actually probably coming out of season three, you can see that the battle lines had cleared up a little bit. You could see that all of that infighting had kind
Mm-hmm.
of gone away, and the show was really left largely to the writers and to the actors more than
And
anything.
the cast bonded so hard
Yeah.
over the first two seasons that by the time you get to season three and onward, you can you don't have any problems believing their camaraderie on screen because they were just as close off screen.
Well, and it's also one of the reasons that Nemesis didn't work
Mm-hmm.
because they had been so tightly bonded during Generations and during First Contact that they had spent so much time apart by the time Nemesis came along that it was like they weren't familiar with each other anymore.
Right. It was like it was more of a reunion. People were re-getting to know each other
Mhm.
instead of falling into their regular symbiotic patterns if while they were seeing each other pretty regularly because Next Generation started in 87, ended
Mhm.
in 94. Then
Ended
Generations
on a
came
very high note.
Generations came out later in 94, and then they were together through 95 when they were shooting First Contact that came out in 96. Then they were together in 97 for Insurrection that came out in 98, and then they were apart for 4 years.
Yeah.
So
Nemesis just always
everything
felt like,
a tacky add-on.
yeah.
And I'm glad that they did another movie,
Hmm.
but I wish they would have told the cast that it was going to be the last movie.
Yeah.
They didn't do that.
Hmm.
During, um, they were interviewed later, and they said we didn't know that it was our last Star Trek movie until we saw the campaign, the advertising campaign saying a generation's end. They didn't tell any of them that this was going to be the very final Next Generation movie.
Part of the thing was with this is the fact that at the time, I think I think Enterprise by that point was the only one that was still on,
Mm-hmm. Mm.
and I could be wrong.
Um, Voyager was finishing up.
Okay,
In
by that point,
2002 was the end of Voyager and probably I think the penultimate season of Enterprise because I
and
think Enterprise only went for
was
4 years.
Enterprise was a good show, but it never picked up. It never really.
Enterprise was a lot better than anybody has ever given it credit for, and I would really love you to revisit that too if you
Oh, I
haven't.
plan to. I
It's
plan to.
so much better than anybody considered it in its original run. It's very underrated, and I think
The
that
problem is the problem is that it took a long time for it to get to be a Star Trek show
yeah,
because it was a prequel.
yeah,
Because this was the first Star Trek prequel,
yes,
and it took a very long time. And the producers were, or maybe the executives, got really weirdly and creepily fascinated by Jolene Blaylock,
yes,
and the operative word being creepy.
mm,
And so you had full whole episodes that were dedicated to just leering, and it I think that was one of the things that frustrated me.
yeah, yeah, and early on because they were still kind of this
Beautiful
was
woman, don't get me
oh yeah,
wrong,
yeah, yeah,
but
but they went into these decompression chambers
yeah,
or quarantine chambers every time they went out and had to come back in for something, and
otherwise known as excuses to get her out of her uniform.
excuses to get everybody into their underwear. Yeah,
Yeah,
but predominantly yes, her.
yeah.
Um, yes, that is very upsetting. It's as upsetting as the episode's long gaze fests at Seven of Nine in her
Yeah.
unitards.
Although they weren't quite as blisteringly obvious because I
because they
think
never t-
largely
because she never took that skin suit off. That
largely I think it's because, and forgive me, I know people would disagree with me, Terry Ryan is a much better actor. Um, and also it's the nature of the role
hmm
because Jolene Blaylock was playing a Vulcan too, so
hmm
so my comment may be off, but I
I
really
recommend rewatching it. It's
oh I plan to get there. I
quite
plan
a
to
show.
get there. It's just
Quite a show.
now what we were talking about with when Nemesis came out is that Star Trek effectively was waning in popularity,
hmm
particularly in the wake of the revitalization of Star Wars.
hmm
And there were rumors and there was talk at the time that Star Trek was essentially dead.
Right, because Nemesis came out the same year as Attack of the Clones.
Right. And as much as people bitched about Attack of the Clones, people did go back and see it again and again and again and
hmm
again and again.
And most people who saw Nemesis tried to forget that they saw Nemesis.
Right.
I have
Um,
I have over the years come to a better feeling for it, but I still don't like it.
here's the funny thing. Here's the funny thing. My initial opinions on both have flipped because I now like Nemesis a little more than I did when I first saw it, and I
hmm
now like Attack of the Clones a little less than I first saw it. But Attack of the Clones, I'm in a very, very weird place because my wife and I are hardcore Star Wars fans, and we had a Star Wars wedding. And
Did she
Attack of the Clones
propose
is the
to her?
first movie we ever saw together.
Yep, 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 yep. Yeah, you mentioned that when we were talking about Star Wars. Yeah.
But
Um,
Star Trek didn't really come back in its full popularity
until the
until,
Kelvin stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
The
until the
the
2009 film.
hmm
But um, it Star Trek never really dies as long as you keep reinventing it, and as long as people keep understanding, as long as the producers keep understanding what it's supposed to be.
It's not dead, so long as we remember it.
Yes.
That's my little Star Trek 2 moment right there.
Is that a poem? No, just something Spock was trying
Something
to tell me
Spock
on
was
my
trying to tell
birthday.
me on my birthday.
How do you feel?
Young. I feel young.
All right, well we're gonna end this full blown mini episode.
Yeah, this was a long one.
I don't know how long this was.
Longer than probably we could get away with calling it a mini, but
This
here
is
we
two
are.
guys just yammering and andling. That's what these mini episodes are supposed to
We're
be.
geeking out over Star Trek. We love
Yeah.
Star Trek. You know, if 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 somebody said, you know, you have to make a decision, and between Star Wars and Star Trek, and whichever one you choose gets to stay in existence, and whichever one you don't choose has to go away forever, I would choose Star Wars.
You know what that is? That's the end of Sophie's Choice.
Yeah, yeah. I
You
wouldn't
know,
equate
that's
Star Trek to the life of a child, but I get where you're going with that.
what I mean. Seriously, you
Yeah,
got
it
to
is.
keep one and you got to get rid of the other ones. Wow.
Yeah,
Now I'm gonna say Star Wars as well, but damn.
yeah. That's gut wrenching, especially if you're allowed to remember what gets destroyed.
Yeah, yeah. If you're aware of what went away,
Yeah.
it might make you appreciate it more. But
Yeah, well,
okay, so let's wrap this thing up.
yeah. You can find all of our episodes at the podbaydoorspodcast.wordpress.com. You can find us on iTunes and on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at pod_bay. And you can find us on Patreon. If you want to kick a tip into our virtual tip jar, you can find us there the same as our Twitter handle, not twiddle hander, Twitter handle
We're Twitter pated.
at pod_bay. We thank you so much for joining us, and the Pod Bay doors are shimmying closed from their slightly open position.
The mission has been completed.